Buju gakana wia ninwago shindagu minua migizi dodem Beshawad Ishkonigan Wayne Bayan Gazagaskwa Jime Kag. I'm really excited and happy to have you all join me here this evening as we talk about my latest book, The Language Warrior's Manifesto: How to Keep Our Languages Alive No Matter the Odds. I'm really excited to have a discussion with all of you. Feel free to drop your questions and comments into the chat section, and I look forward to a lively discussion with everyone. As we launch the event this evening, I wanted to take a minute to just draw our attention to events transpiring around our region and the country and the world. The murder of George Floyd has sparked a lot of attention to issues of justice and a lot of thinking about how we can make our world a better place. I have strongly believed for a long time that human beings have orchestrated some pretty horrible and oppressive ways of dealing with one another, and that some of the greatest healing available to us can come in our explorations of deeper connection to one another and to our ancestral roots. For me, working with the Ojibwe language and culture has been not an academic enterprise, although it connects with academia, but something that is truly spiritual and healing for me. And so I'm really excited to talk to all of you about my journey and a collective journey that all of us as human beings can embark upon. For the book, I really spent a couple of sections. I tried to look at what is the importance of Indigenous language, its revitalization, what's in the way. I share a personal story that I don't often share in a lot of my other works about my not just language journey, but my spiritual journey and personal development. And in addition to that, I talk about how we did it in efforts to develop collective action and meaningful change. It's been really heartening for me to see a lot of what's been happening, not just with Ojibwe, although that's the language with which I have the most experience, but with many other Indigenous languages. Ultimately, I feel like there's a lot at stake, and not just for speakers of highly endangered languages, but for all of us. I think all human beings have been deeply impacted by colonization. White folk were busy hurting and colonizing one another for a long time before they took to colonizing other people in other parts of the world. And the colonial response to problems has often been a really violent one. And even when we have a public health crisis around COVID, for example, we frame our response in terms of a war against COVID, rather than a healing from or a protection from, and things like that. And ultimately, I just believe that so many of the problems we deal with that were created by colonization simply cannot and will not be solved by the colonial response. We have to look to the cultures of other groups of people so they can pollinate the garden we're all trying to harvest from, and so we can learn from one another and support one another. And I believe the issues we face around climate change and human political and cultural systems really have a lot to learn from Indigenous worldviews, and those worldviews are embedded in our languages. So I can't think of anything really more fundamentally important. I think a lot of times we look at the world, and I've been told this many times, like, why should somebody bother to learn an Indigenous language? What economic value does that have? Most people who speak that language are elders. They're not doing business. And first of all, that's not true. Uh, there are lots of people of many different languages who are doing big business in those languages. But beyond that, why does something have to have economic value to have value? And when you look at anybody on their deathbed, they're usually not asking economic questions. They're looking out for their loved ones and their family and their legacy and things like that. So ultimately, I think this too is part of the importance of Indigenous language work. When my heart's been hurting here this past week or so, looking at the death of George Floyd and broader issues of injustice, and just an awareness of how cruel and unfair the world can be sometimes. We're all dealt a hand of cards in life, and on the one hand, we have to play that hand the best way that we can. I do tell my children that. But if that's all I tell my kids, because our system, our world is so oppressive, I'd be essentially teaching them to be good oppressors. And at the same time that we have to play the hand of cards that we are dealt the best way that we can, we also have to work to change the rules to the game, to provide more equitable access to opportunity and a wide array of tools for addressing and solving problems. We all need healing and we all need decolonizing. I'm the first generation in my family that has not served in the armed forces or killed somebody on a battlefield. My father and grandfather and most of my uncles have served in the U.S. Armed Forces, and going back a couple generations before that, most of my Ojibwe relatives were engaged in Ojibwe Dakota wars. And ultimately, I've watched, our victorious American soldiers in my family who've really struggled with the effects of winning their wars because the conflict is so dehumanizing for everybody. We have to find different ways of doing things. And I really do think that the healing and decolonizing go hand in hand. I'd like to invite all of you who are joining me on the call to feel free to add your comments and questions, and I'm going to field as many of those. You can steer me and this conversation in whatever directions are of greatest interest to you. If you're just joining, my name's Anton Treuer. I'm a professor of Ojibwe at Bemidji State University, author of a number of books, and we'll be talking a little bit tonight about this one, The Language Warrior's Manifesto, How to Keep Our Languages Alive No Matter the Odds. I get to wear a lot of hats, though, and I really see a deep connection between all of them. So I do a lot of racial equity work. I train teachers, social workers, law enforcement. I do a lot of work around Indigenous language revitalization and around serving my Indigenous community, not just in terms of language, but broadly in terms of culture as well. To me, all of those things are interconnected. And I think we have a lot to learn from one another through the sharing of culture and worldview. And of course, those things are embedded in our languages. So I see a couple of comments here. And I see Sam's comment about law enforcement. And I just want to say that heavy on my heart and mind has been the death of George Floyd. And I believe that we are at a real inflection point in America. Oppression is a highly adaptable beast. And anytime we've had big change in America, it hasn't eliminated oppression. I think ultimately, even the end of slavery didn't end racial caste. It was reinvented as Jim Crow. And the Civil Rights Movement with the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act that dismantled Jim Crow, that also didn't dismantle racial caste. It was reinvented as a school to prison pipeline. And we need to be very, very attentive to the issues of equity and justice, not just as they specifically affect the fallout after the murder of George Floyd, but for all of us. You know, for me, when 9/11 happened and we saw firefighters and police officers who died trying to save people there, it felt like it wasn't just an assault on individual officers, but it was an assault on the whole country. So when somebody wearing a uniform like that commits a murder, it doesn't feel like a lone wolf bad actor. It feels like an assault by the country. And I think a lot of people of color, certainly for me, I felt like on a different day or in different circumstances that could be me. It's not an isolated event. It's part of a endemic system that needs to be dismantled. And I really do believe that there are many fault lines and many fronts in which we need to address these issues of oppression around race, but really all of the other isms that impact us as well, around gender, around economics, and many other things. So for me, as I've struggled sometimes, feeling eaten up and exhausted in the effort to address these things, you know, there's so much inertia. It is so difficult to get a really productive conversation going that it's easy to give up sometimes. And some of the issues that we're confronting seem so monolithic. I have found some of my greatest personal healing and some of the greatest collective healing in our language and culture revitalization efforts. So I'm seeing some comments starting to join the feed here. See David O'Fallon, glad to have you on the call, saying please comment on use of the word warrior. And I will certainly do that. I was sharing just a few minutes ago on the call how I'm the first generation in my family that has not served in the military in my family. And I'm reminded of a teaching we have around our ceremonial drums that our people will never be at peace until our warriors lead us to peace. And that the way of the warrior in an Ojibwe context is not simply about violence, but protection and applying efforts, not just in terms of physical protection, but protecting the things that are most important and precious to all of us. And sometimes the actions of a warrior will involve a sacrifice of time, of energy, of resources. And these sorts of things can be done not in ways that take life, but that build things. And I believe that although I have not served in the armed forces, that my efforts at revitalizing Indigenous language and culture really fill that role just as well, in a different capacity. And I think all of us, all human beings, have Indigenous roots to somewhere. Many people have been very disconnected from their indigeneity because they're not connected to their Indigenous homeland, language, or culture. But I do believe that there are ways for us to rebuild those connections. And I think it offers some of the most profound, transformative, healing opportunity for all of us. For me, maybe I'll share just a couple of personal stories that will help bring this to light. So among the hats I wear is I am a father, and have been raising 9 children. I've got 5 out the door and 4 to go. I've got 5 boys and 4 girls, and it's kind of a terrifying job raising kids this day and age. For me, I've got kids that are kind of every color of the rainbow. I just happen to have in my office here a picture of our latest Christmas card, and you can kind of get a sense of, my crew here. So most of my kids are pretty dark, and, it's terrifying just, having them drive a car nowadays. Not simply because of what's happening on the road, but from how they will be policed. All of my boys have been pulled over by the police now. I got to make sure that their driver's license is in the dash and, on the visor, not in the glove compartment, so they won't be misunderstood if they have to reach for a piece of paper. It's scary sending my kids out into the world. I've really appreciated in my Ojibwe cultural toolbox some of the things we have to teach my boys, for example, about what it means to be a man. Hoa, Anin, Hannah, Giwabamin. For example, as my kids have come of age, actually all my children, boys and girls, love to hunt. And we have a special ceremony as they come of age, and the first time they kill a deer, for example. And we will have a feast. There'll be a prayer, and instead of just eating, there's kind of a ritual feeding of the successful hunter. We'll have one of the parents, my wife or I, will take a spoon of the food, and if the kid's name happens to be Migizi, meaning eagle, we'll say, "All right, Migizi," and offer him a spoon of the food, and he has to refuse the first bite and say, "No, I'm thinking about children who don't have enough to eat." "Ah, okay." We'll put it back, take another spoonful, Migizi, and he has to refuse again. "No, I'm thinking about my elders who can't get out in the woods to hunt for themselves." "Ah, okay." Put it back, take another one. Migizi. "No, I'm thinking about my family, my community, people who came here today to support me." And then we'll do it again. Migizi. And he'll take a bite of the food. And then we'll speak to that kid. Usually it's a teeny bopper, 13 or something when they get their first deer. And we'll say, "Well, Migizi, you just changed your life. Up until today, you were what we called a dependent. You depended on everybody in this room to provide all of your food. But today, you're providing for all of us." And there they are, parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents. That's what it means to be an adult. From today on, you'll have a special power. It's the power to gather resources. You'll have it when you hunt, when you fish. You'll have it when, you get a job. Use your power to think about, children who don't have enough, your elders who can't go out in the woods and get it for themselves, your family, your community. And then they give away the rest of their killed, packaged up deer meat, so they're impoverished. And it's quite an empowering experience for young people when this happens. Ultimately, since I have 9 kids and I get to do a lot of experimenting, I've seen profound impacts. I feel like our cultural practices both reflect the values of a people and also shape the values of a people. And I had one of my kids who I think was just somebody from a different point in time almost. Like he simply had a knack for being in the woods, a love of doing those sorts of things, and at the same time kind of struggled sitting behind a desk all day in school and had a lot of, I guess, difficult and stressful experiences going to school. When he went through this experience, it was transformative for him. One time I had a friend complaining, saying, "Oh, my back, it's hard for me to get out in the woods." And My kid was 16 years old sitting there listening, and he didn't say anything, but he went out hunting. He harvested a deer. He packaged it up. He drove over to my friend's house. He filled up his freezer and even brought him a tan deer hide. And my friend was saying, wow, I didn't even know anybody remembered that. And I can see in the comments here, some people are saying, hey, not everybody has this access to this rich cultural experience. And I have to say this, my family didn't either. This had to be rebuilt. My grandmother, who is still alive at age 97, went to residential boarding school, received harsh physical discipline for speaking Ojibwe, and she learned English quickly and still operates in English much more than she would in Ojibwe. My mother didn't grow up as a fluent speaker of our language. I think for her, harvesting wild rice, hunting, fishing, that was stuff all the kids in Bena, in the heart of the Leech Lake Reservation, had to do to contribute to the financial well-being and food supply for their family. She had certain aspects of culture that she did grow up with. But I was born in Washington, D.C., as my mother was attending law school and ended up becoming the first female Native attorney in the state of Minnesota. And we moved back to Minnesota, and I spent most of my formative years here. But it was a reconstructive effort. And I didn't grow up like with a first kill feast for myself, even though I did get brought out in the woods and taught how to hunt and things like that. So for me, even my job as a parent has been rebuilding and reestablishing these kind of family traditions. And the same thing around learning language and other aspects of culture. It has been empowering and transformative for me personally, but for my children too, who seem to really have taken it to heart. And I believe in this stuff. I've seen what it can do. I've seen it happen on scale. I've been lucky enough to go to Hawaii a number of times. And in the United States of America, the Hawaiians are really the first indigenous group that has really substantially revitalized their language and culture. At the lowest point, they were down to 1,000 speakers of the language. And today there are now 22,000 speakers. There are over 20 Hawaiian medium schools. You can go to school K-12 and college, all Hawaiian medium. And there are now over 3,000 first speakers of Hawaiian who've learned it as their first language in the home. And none of that happened by accident. Their language was illegal for use in public schools when they started this effort. So I have to say it's been really quite remarkable for me to see what has happened there and what is beginning to happen in other places. So I have seen some really incredible efforts around Mohawk, Cherokee, Ojibwe, Blackfeet that have given me a lot of inspiration and give me a lot of hope. I really do think that while the future vitality of many indigenous languages is not certain, it is certainly possible, depending on the depth and breadth of our efforts to revitalize them now. Yeah, and I'm seeing Jenna's comments here. In light of current injustices, would you be able to share your viewpoint on the current injustices in indigenous communities and how we can help? I have provided just a little bit earlier in the call some information and perspective on the murder of George Floyd and how that's impacting me personally, and a little bit about how that's impacting Native communities. Certainly, there's been an assault on Black and brown bodies in America since the arrival of non-Indigenous people here. And it is not as safe for Indigenous people and other people of color as it is for white Americans. And the racism's always been real. I think the main difference now is that it's being recorded, and it's a little harder for some people to ignore. Overcoming these things is difficult. And I think my message would be different to different people that I'm speaking to. So, to my white brothers and sisters, I would say that what I'm looking for from you would first of all be a deep, introspective look at the anatomy of oppression and privilege. And by that I mean, it's very tempting, I think, for us to think of, racial prejudice and privilege to be an issue of a few KKK members, or white supremacists. Those guys are really easy to see. But the fact of the matter is that the issues of racism are profound and systemic, and they're not simply at the level of individual behavior. Like, I happen to be a good guy. My wife, who's from the Swedish American tribe, here's our family Christmas card. She's this one over here. And, blonde hair, blue eyes. We both like to go for a run. And every morning, we live in a rural area. The only thing that makes me feel unsafe is people texting and driving. But if my wife's out for a run and somebody's pulled over to the side of the road to deal with their cell phone or something, her heart starts to race. She starts thinking, oh God, are they after me? Is this going to be a sexual assault? Should I turn back? Should I run into the woods? She's not as safe as me in that circumstance, and she never feels as safe as me. And I'm still a good guy. And I work at a university, and I chair search committees, and I make sure half the people on every search committee are women, and it's still safer for me. And I still feel safer in that context. Now, when we get behind the wheel, it's a totally different story. My wife has never been pulled over by the cops. I've been pulled over 40 times, including twice this past year for no seatbelt while wearing a seatbelt. I've had police pull guns on me twice, and I'm a fuddy-duddy professor dude. So that's the anatomy of this stuff. For white Americans, you can pay attention to that conversation when you want and how you want, as it suits your comfort. And so instead of saying, I'm a nice guy, I wish those people were different, it's important for us to look at, what am I not seeing? What questions am I not asking myself? How is the anatomy of my privilege enabling me to disengage, or to only engage at a level of comfort for me? So I'm looking for my white brothers and sisters to have that introspective look, and then to use it to build their own awareness, and then recruit other white people to the conversation. So a really effective ally is going to be one who is less looking to do equity work as an act of charity to Black and brown folk, but one who's willing to have a difficult conversation with the folks they see at their own Thanksgiving dinner or when they're opening Christmas presents. That's what I'm looking for from my white brothers and sisters. I think, for my Black and brown brothers and sisters, I have a little different message, even though we're engaged at different fronts of the same battle. I think it's important for me in my work. Like I'm out there doing a lot of things that are creating a high level of exposure to stress. Like right now, I'm trying to broker a community conversation with our police department with opening listening sessions. We've had issues with white vigilantes chasing Native people around Bemidji just over the past couple of days. We're asking the police department to set up an independent organization to receive complaints about police, because it's kind of hard to complain to the police officer who harassed you about their harassment of you. There are a number of things that are on the agenda. And sometimes that work and just the energy around it can be quite consuming. So I think for my Black and brown brothers and sisters, the importance of self-care, spending time in affinity space with other Black and brown folk, as well as thinking about what the right amounts and right kinds of engagement with the rest of the world are. I think those are important conversations to have, and to be strategic and structured in our responses for greatest effect. And so there's a lot, to the racial equity response, but certainly the racism dehumanizes all of us, and there is a oneness to our humanity, even though we don't have the same experiences. Race may be a social construct, but it dominates our lives, and not just once in a while, but all the time. Like, white people and everybody else are affected by race 100% of the time. Some white folk may think I'm only affected like 5% of the time, but the effects are not only negative. You are affected every time you are not pulled over. It's affecting us all the time. And so I think it's really incumbent upon all of us to think about, what is my part of the lift? And we all have blind spots, all of us. So we're like fish, we can see everything in our environment perfectly, except for the glass bowl that confines us. So how do we see? And it's by developing some sonar. It's why conversations like this are so vital. Sonar is sound waves going out and sound waves coming back. It's a constant conversation that helps us navigate things that we cannot naturally otherwise see. We need all perspectives, all racial perspectives, gender perspectives, sexual orientation perspectives, and so forth. And we all have parts of the work that only we can do. And some of the work has to happen in affinity spaces. And this happens within the racial climate. This happens in the language work too. There's some things I have to do just with Ojibwe speakers. And then there are things that I have to do with everybody else on the planet. And it's important to be thoughtful about those, because the rest of the world will be happy to dictate all of our agendas. And we need to be thoughtful about how we decide to allocate our time. It's a precious and finite resource. So I see a comment from Lydia here. Would you be willing to speak about white educators teaching Indigenous students and how to best support their language and history as First People? Yeah, Lydia, thank you very much for the question. First of all, within education, we have so much work to do. We have striking disparities. A state like Minnesota, for example, and actually Minnesota and the surrounding states, it's like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, North Dakota, Iowa, these states rank the top in aggregate test scores, and they rank at the very bottom in racially predictable disparities in education. And something, like 82% of American teachers are white women. Nothing wrong with being white, nothing wrong with being a woman, but that's who's doing a lot of the teaching at a time when the majority of America's school-age children are students of color. And it makes a difference. The first time I ever had an Indigenous teacher was when I was pursuing a PhD. K-12, college, master's, never. And it makes a big difference. My mother ended up pursuing a nursing degree and then eventually a law degree, but she went into nursing because the only professional Native person she had ever seen was the school nurse. Role models make a difference, and perspectives make a difference. I feel like we have fundamental power dynamics operating in education. It's like, here's what we have in education. We have a big, beautiful bowl of whiteness. We believe in it so much that, and we love all of our kids so much that we'll go drive to the houses of the kids who are truant, drive them to the school and give them 2 spoonsful of this bowl of whiteness because we think it's so good for them. What we're not doing is saying, why should it be whiteness that we're delivering? Why should it be delivered in a bowl? Why with a spoon? And who should be engaged in making the decisions about what the deliverables are and how we go about delivering them? If you're in education, you could ask yourself, how many committees have you been on that were majority, minority? And most educators have a hard time coming up with any examples of that, even when the majority of the kids in the school that they're serving are Indigenous or people of color. So we've got some fundamental work to do. It's like the whiter the teaching core and the whiter the curriculum, the better those white students are doing and the worse everybody else is doing. Our educational system is fundamentally a white empowerment program, and the data supports that conclusion. So for my beloved teacher colleagues who are taking a humble wage to do one of the most important jobs in our country, I thank you for your service, but we need to do some hard work. We need to revolutionize and transform the curriculum that is being delivered, the ways in which it's being delivered, and how we're going about the work, how we're going about the decision-making process. What are our hiring practices? What are our onboarding practices? Welcome to school district, whatever the number. Here's what our demographics are, and here's what we think everybody should know to be successful working with these learners. And I think doubling down on a common core with academic English and mathematics to the exclusion of all other subjects, I think is not working. One of the things that really impressed me about Wadukodaring Ojibwe Language Institute, which is kind of the flagship Ojibwe language immersion school in Wisconsin, is not just the success of engaging with families and students and their engagement with the school. All of that is heartening and awesome to me. But what really impresses a lot of other people, and the school's been operating a little over 20 years now, and I think for the first 15 years of operation, they had nearly a 100% pass rate in state-mandated tests administered in English. At a time when Indigenous learners are failing state-mandated tests in English and math about 50% of the time. If somebody's figuring this stuff out, maybe we should pay more attention to that. And what we are learning from the Hawaiian experience, the Cherokee experience, the Mohawk experience, the Blackfeet experience, the Ojibwe experience, is that when students get a chance to learn about who they really are, that builds self-esteem and engagement with everything else in the curriculum. When you're centering an Indigenous language in the work, you naturally have to find some Indigenous language speakers to deliver the goods, and it attacks the role model issues, and cultural sensitivity and so forth. And it really seems to deliver the goods in a way that nothing else can. And we're even seeing diverse school districts like Portland Public Schools with 58 different languages spoken in the district, that have almost entirely eliminated racially predictable achievement disparities in test scores by a very attentive focus on racial equity and cultural competency with a diverse curriculum and teaching team. So to me, that speaks mountains. And why would we take an educational system that was kind of developed by the British for the education of white English kids, and here we are still teaching the same curriculum the same ways, and we're expecting different results over and over? And we can't incrementally, adjust and keep praying for different results and really expect them. We have to do something different. And there are places doing things differently that are showing different results. We need to tune into that stuff. So culturally responsive curriculum, attentive to different learning styles. Not everybody functions on a written system. A lot of people are auditory learners, they're kinetic learners, they got to get up and do things. There are a lot of different variables that impact education, and I think we're finding some really innovative ways to do that. I'm happy to go deeper into the education stuff. I do a lot of work with K-12 educators, to give you a deeper sense of what that looks like. But I wanted to say that much, and I really appreciate the question. So Shannon's asking, what can we expect to find in this new book that hasn't been covered in your previous books? Well, first of all, it's just a totally different work. What I tried to do here was something quite different from my other works, and I do have a broad array of work. Like I've done history books, I've done everything you wanted to know about Indians but were afraid to ask, which is kind of a questions and answers covering a broad array of topics in the Native world, and I've done a lot of Ojibwe language work too. But this one was different. This is I kind of broke this book down into a few simple sections. What is the importance of Indigenous language learning? What's in the way of Indigenous language revitalization? And then I did something that I've often been a little more reluctant to do. I told my personal story with my personal language journey, culture journey. And then I talked about, in addition to kind of how I did it, I talked about how we did it. Efforts to revitalize Ojibwe, Hawaiian, other Indigenous languages, and what's worked and what hasn't, so that this work can function both as a personal narrative, a collective narrative, but also a manual and a manifesto that points out the pitfalls and the power dynamics to help other potential language and culture warriors advance their own mission and make connections to other success stories, and to learn from the failures of other people, so that we can help our languages and cultures thrive in the future. Yeah, so I really appreciate that, and I'm happy too to we've been kind of covering a wide range of topics here, but I'm happy to go deeper into any of these particular parts of the work. With my own personal story, I don't share that so much because I believe that my story is the most important one to know. It's just one that I know, and I made plenty of stupid mistakes, but I discovered some pretty important and empowering truths in the effort, and I know that there are a lot of people who are really hungry to know more about themselves. And it's kind of ironic that in spite of 500 pretty rough years, we're still here. We still have languages to revitalize, and that we can show the rest of the world a totally different way to approach healing and community building. So I'm really heartened by the impact of the work so far, and I feel like it's just getting going. There are so many passionate people who care about these topics. I'm really excited to see it happen. I'm seeing Michelle asking a question. The homogenized history books are so lacking in the actual history classrooms in middle and high schools, in my opinion. But I couldn't agree with that more. It's true. The materials being used to teach, the teaching methods that we're using, the structure of schools, and the skill sets that we're asking kids to develop and focus on, I think it's way out of alignment with what we should be focusing on, or what seems to be most impactful for a lot of kids to be successful in this environment. So I certainly think that we have some heavy lifting to do in education. And by the way, this isn't just about charity work for poor, pitiful people of color or something like that. The majority of American students are students of color, the majority. And the graduation rate for students of color is 60%. And for Indigenous learners, it's 50%. And it's not a recipe for a healthy country to take our largest demographic group of students and only get a little over half of them to the finish line with high school, when the average annual income for someone who doesn't finish high school is $20,000 a year. We should want everybody to be load-bearing citizens with jobs paying taxes. That's the Republican argument. And we should want them to have equal access to opportunity, full humanity, and a chance to climb Maslow's hierarchy of needs all the way to the tippy top, the Democratic argument. So we got some work to do. And there are tools to do the work. Question about the Northern Lights textbook, widely used across the state. There are new additions. Is there progress? Yeah, you know, I think it was a great first effort at curricular development and enhancement in our area. I think compared to previously available work, it was light years ahead. I still think there's room to grow, and room to grow the diversity of voices that are providing the material that we all use. It's not the case that there aren't Indigenous scholars and voices and authors. It's not the case that there aren't Black scholars, voices, and authors. There's a lot of material out there. And we can pull that in and put it to better use. And there's some ongoing efforts, too, that I think offer a lot of opportunity even beyond Northern Lights curriculum. Where even a lot of school districts, there's a cooperative in Minnesota, I think 76 districts are part of it, where they're developing new curriculum and putting it up online with a Creative Commons license. The idea being that there'll be so much material, so richly populated by so many diverse voices, that not only will there be plenty of material to choose from, but school districts may not have to spend the millions of dollars they do to buy books at all. And I know it might not sound great for an author to work himself out of a job, but ultimately I think that stands to benefit our kids. One of the only struggles with the work now is that it's not that we're looking for a needle, out there in a stack of hay. It's like, which needle in the stack of needles do you pick? How do we vet the information and make sure we're getting good information, accurate information from strong, authentic voices? So I do think, that's an ongoing and evolving effort. I do appreciate the work of Northern Lights, and I think it still has value and lasting value. But I'm seeing some of these new directions pointing great ways too. Yeah. All right. Yeah, and so I see people are dropping some book recommendations in there. I really appreciate that. I've always found it so ironic, sometimes aggravating, annoying, or even heartbreaking. But people are saying, well, where do I find information? There's not enough information out there. Or even the way they're framing stuff around race in education, there'll be some picture of like a minority representative student, so there'll be like an Asian kid, a Native kid, a Black kid, a Hispanic kid, and there's a white teacher showing them all the way. And I always find it so ironic, because I'm like the brown educator showing people of every color, about Ojibwe language or something like that. And there's just kind of loaded power dynamics in how we message and think about the effort. We all have something to teach. We all have something to learn. And those voices are out there. And by the way, for educators who are on the call, just on my website alone, I've got a section on resources, and there's one tab there, like resources for teachers, and there's about 75 pages of vetted resource materials for teachers, lists of books, and things like that. That can be really helpful for people to find Indigenous content and Indigenous authored content that might be useful in the work. My book, Everything You Wanted to Know About Indians But Were Afraid to Ask, has been really well received and used in education. We've got a young reader edition that's going to be coming out here, within the next several months. And so I'm pretty excited for some of that to happen. And we're seeing a lot of other stuff happening too, and people doing really important work. So it is ongoing, and it's way bigger than any one person. So with regard to the Language Warriors Manifesto, I think I'll take maybe a minute or two just to share a little bit about my personal narrative, and feel free to ask questions and kind of guide our discussion in other directions as we go. With a talk like this, there's never a way to exhaust the conversation, and so I also just wanted to mention that I am happy to take phone calls, emails, sustain the conversation on social media. I've usually got a list of events free and open to the public, posted on the website. COVID's obviously thrown a monkey wrench into my travel schedule, and a lot of those types of events. But I'm an active voice, I'm out there, and I'm happy to be of assistance to anyone that I can. So, with my personal narrative, I just want to say that I didn't grow up with my language and culture on a silver platter. I mentioned previously on this event how, there was a break in the intergenerational transmission of language and culture in my family. My grandmother was and is a survivor of residential boarding schools. My mother grew up a monolingual English speaker, and I had to go after and relearn my language. And I thought there's no simple way for somebody to do that, but there are ways to do it. For myself, I probably had a little bit more holistic path. I ended up finding Archie Mosé. He was kind of a renowned spiritual leader in Wisconsin on the St. Croix Reservation. When I went to see him, he was born in 1901, and he was in his 30s the first time he saw a black man, and a teenager the first time he saw a white man, in his 30s the first time he saw a car. When I saw him, he was watching WWF SmackDown on a TV in a modern house, and I walked in the door and he said, "I've been waiting for you." And I thought this was so strange, but he had a dream about someone. He thought I looked like the person in his dream, and we ended up forming a really deep friendship. He could speak English, but not terribly well, and he usually operated in Ojibwe, and so I had a genuine immersion experience with him that really catapulted me in a totally new direction. I kind of felt like that scene from Forrest Gump when after that, everywhere he went, he was running, and he was running everywhere but never thought it would take him somewhere. And I kind of felt like that about language and culture. I was just excited to be in the room or the wigwam and to be learning, and I never thought it was going to take me somewhere until it did. And it's really the center of my adult life and spiritual work and service to others is around our culture and language. And I found it personally transformative and beyond empowering as I've worked with my own family and children. My daughter Madeline, for example, not only was, did I have the most time with her as my firstborn child, speaking to her in Ojibwe all the time, but she also took my classes at Bemidji State University, went to UG, Ojibwe Motari Daoma, to Kimanang, which is an adult immersion program for Ojibwe that has really catapulted a lot of speakers to a higher level of language aptitude. And now she's part of transcription teams that are recording and transcribing elders and publishing books, and it's been really heartening to see the rebuilding effort now to the point where I can say in my family we're restoring the intergenerational transmission of language. But I'm certainly not alone. There are many other families. Keller Papp, Lisa Larange have done this with their children and their work at Wadukudading. And I think the collective work around especially immersion schools and other efforts to build young people into successful speakers really builds not just their knowledge of the language, but their knowledge of themselves. And to see young Indigenous people strong and comfortable in their own skin ready to tackle the rest of the world is incredibly powerful. I see Marge's comment, I love how you taught yourself Ojibwe language. Does your school offer online Ojibwe language courses? So here's what we do at Bemidji State. We are changing and we are evolving. It used to be only classes offered in person. Now what we're doing is we are using kind of an interactive TV platform. So my classes pipe out to Mankato State University, Onamia High School, Central Lakes Community College, and we've had a number of sites that have been involved and students who are really all over the place. So at the moment, our classes are interactive and connected that way. COVID has provided some interesting challenges and opportunities. So this past semester, we had to switch everything to an online format using Zoom, and we had learners and they were scattered all over several states. And there are some limitations to a highly interactive class that operates that way, but there's some real empowerment and opportunity that way too. So we found our groove and made it work. And I do think that this will be a growth area for us going forward. And I've been pretty excited about some of the work going on in Mille Lacs, for example, where they're really making a historic investment in our language. Right now, we just had signed 3 new book contracts with the Minnesota Historical Society for monolingual Ojibwe publications. Those books will be coming out this fall. They're all already up on the Minnesota State Historical Society Press website. And Amazon and so forth for pre-orders. And we're developing some other really powerful language learning tools and applications. And I think, the technologies that are out there for Rosetta Stone and other things, Duolingo, Babbel, and so forth, offer a lot of potential for us to overcome the challenges we have around space and time to really be effective with language learning wherever people are at. Ultimately, I think I want to spend just a minute too to talk about the experience for people on the learning side of language work. It is through no fault of our own that a lot of our people didn't get to grow up fluent speakers. And I don't think we should be blaming or shaming ourselves or anyone else for what was not handed to us on a silver platter. We're right where we should be, having been through all the crap that we've been through. But here we are. The world is not fair. And we have to generate the fairness and the opportunity that we want to see for ourselves and our kids. And that doesn't mean that it will be easy. I think anyone and everyone who wants to learn an Indigenous language can do that. And for some groups like Ojibwe, Blackfeet, Mohawk, Hawaiian, the resources are far more accessible than they are for others. But even for people in these groups, it's tough. And I think, I want to encourage young people not to blame elders for what they didn't teach. And I want to encourage elders not to blame young people for what they didn't learn. But I do want to encourage everybody to lean in and just do the work. Ultimately, most of the really serious contributors on language work started out humble, without a lot of help or support, and just went all in on the work. I myself have often felt like I'm stumbling, bumbling, rumbling, and I find the work quite humbling. But at the same time, I find it really empowering. I feel like my language is a gift from our Creator to my ancestors who did everything they could to create opportunity for their future generations during difficult, impossible circumstances. As Indigenous people, we have the right to change over time. You know, at some point, dudes in England quit worshiping at Stonehenge and painting their faces blue, but they're still authentic and legitimate Englishmen. And as Indigenous people, you know, our circumstances now are different from our circumstances 100 years ago or 200 years ago. At the same time, how much can a people change and still be the same people? That's a fair question too. There is a lot at stake with our Indigenous languages and cultures. But shame doesn't belong in the equation. No one should be ashamed of where we are, how we got here. We just have to accept the challenge to pick up everything that we've been bequeathed and all of the challenges that come with it. It's difficult to find the right tone. Like, if there's not enough adversity in your life, you never develop the musculature for doing heavy lifting. If there's too much adversity in your life, it's traumatizing. And I think as Indigenous people, we got both. But we are more than the sum of our tragedies. We are more than the sum of our tragedies. We have developed musculature, strength for doing real heavy lifting. We are the folks who figured out how to get food when it was cold out there, who figured out how to cooperate, who figured out how to build things, who figured out how to create and recreate our societies based upon the unique circumstances that we find ourselves in. And we're doing that again right now. I don't think we should be objects of pity, even though we have been subjected to oppression at times. I think we have tremendous capacity. And of all the problems that we are facing in Indigenous communities, there's not a one of them that can't be addressed by the strength, resilience, and tools that we continue to carry in Indigenous communities. And in the work, I think there is learning, inspiration, and contribution that is welcome from all people of all backgrounds. At stake here is not just, a pretty bird singing in the forest, but some of the most important tools we have to effect real healing, not just for Indigenous people, but for all people, and to not just interrupt, but disrupt the colonial regimes and oppression dynamics that dehumanize us all. I think this has been a great format, and I have been really heartened to see all of the engagement and wonderful questions that I have been getting from everybody on this call. I'll work with the Historical Society Press, and we'll do another one of these soon. I'll remain active on social media, on my website. You can call, you can email, you can even go to the appointments tab on my website and set up an appointment if you've got something you want to talk about. I want to thank you all for everything that you are doing in your efforts to address racial inequity, Indigenous language and culture revitalization, education, and everything else that is helping to make the world a better place during really challenging times. Chimigwech, kinagego esh chigeg, apegash, meweni waji menoseg nigan. Migwech.